Come in, come in. Quickly now, before the wind steals the warmth from the hearth. That's it. Settle yourself by the fire. Closest chair's yours if you want it. I won't mind. These old bones have felt enough draught for one lifetime. Listen to that gale howling across the fens. Rattles the shutters something terrible, doesn't it? Nights like these, the locals used to say, the boundary grows thin between the living world and whatever prowls beyond it. But you're safe enough in here. Old oak beams, good English ale, and a fire that's been burning in this hearth since before your grandfather drew breath. The flames know their business, keeping the darkness at bay. I see you eyeing that rain lashing the windows. Aye, it's a proper tempest out there, the kind that turns the lanes to rivers and makes sensible folk grateful for solid walls. Reminds me of another storm, truth be told. One that came howling across Suffolk nearly 4.5 centuries past. Different altogether from tonight's squall, mind you. That one brought something with it. Something that still leaves scorch marks on old church doors, at least if local memory is to be believed. You'll have heard whispers, I expect, if you've travelled these eastern counties. Tales told in low voices after the lamps are dimmed, of a black beast, massive as a calf, with eyes like burning coals. Old Shuck, they call him. The devil's own hound prowling the coastal paths and the ancient trackways where land meets sea and the fog swallows the horizon whole. But the story I'm about to share, this isn't some vague legend passed down through generations of frightened grandmothers. It's a tale tied to a real date, real places, and real damage, written down in different forms, while the fear was still close to the skin. It's the account of the 4th day of August, in the year of our Lord 1577, when something entered 2 churches during Sunday service and left corpses in its wake. 3 men dead at Bungay, 3 more at Blythburgh, 12 miles distant, all on the same morning, all during prayer, and every witness, every God-fearing soul who survived to tell the tale, swore they saw the same thing. A dog of impossible size, wreathed in fire and stinking of brimstone, moving through the nave with terrible purpose. Now, before we get to the blood and the thunder, you need to understand the soil this legend grew from. East Anglia isn't like the rest of England, never has been. It's a place where the sea takes back what it wants. Whole towns, churches, graveyards, all swallowed by the tide. Dunwich, once a thriving port, now lies beneath the waves, its church bells ringing in the deep when the current runs strong. Or so they say. This is borderland, the easternmost edge of Britain, where Danish longships once beached on shingle shores, and Vikings carved out the Danelaw with axe and blood. The old gods came with them, Odin the Wanderer with his ravens and his wolves. When Christianity swept through and the churches rose from the marshland, those old gods didn't simply vanish. They went underground, transformed. The wolves of Odin became the hounds of hell. The wild hunt, that spectral procession of the dead, became a demon to frighten children and sinners alike. There are early medieval accounts that people later point to when they talk about black hounds and dread processions in the night. One oft-cited example is the Peterborough Chronicle, dated to the year 1127. A monk, his hand probably trembling as he formed the letters, described huntsmen, black, huge, and hideous, riding through the deer park on black horses and black goats. Their hounds, he wrote, were jet black with eyes like saucers. Think on that. Eyes like saucers. A description that would be echoed, in spirit, if not in exact wording, 450 years later when a pamphlet was rushed to London presses while bodies were still being laid in Suffolk earth. The name itself tells you what the people feared. Shuck. Some scholars trace it to the Old English scucker, devil, demon, fiend. Others point to the local dialect, shucky, meaning shaggy or matted, like wet fur slick with rain. Either way, the word carried weight. You didn't speak it lightly, especially not after dark, especially not if you were walking alone on the coastal paths where the Har rolls in thick enough to lose yourself in. But in 1577, this wasn't some half-remembered folk tale. This was the Reformation. England had torn itself apart over religion, stripped the gold from the altars, smashed the saints' faces from the glass. The people of Suffolk sat uneasily between the old faith and the new, caught in the crossfire of theological fury. They believed, truly believed, that God watched their every transgression and sent signs of his displeasure. Comets were warnings, earthquakes were judgments, and storms were the very wrath of heaven made manifest. So when the sky turned black that August morning, when the thunder cracked loud enough to split stone, when the lightning came down like the finger of God himself, well, what else could it be but divine retribution? What else could have burst through those church doors but the devil in the shape of a beast, come to claim his due from a congregation of sinners? Pour yourself another measure. You'll need it. Because what happened next, in two churches 12 miles apart on the same Sabbath morning, defies any comfortable explanation. The congregation at St. Mary's in Bungay had gathered early that morning. Sunday service, same as every week since time out of mind. The church was old even then, Norman stone, thick walls that had weathered centuries of coastal gales. Inside, it would have been dim, candles flickering against the whitewashed walls where colourful saints' images had been scraped away by order of the crown. The smell of damp wool and tallow, of earth and incense lingering in the very stones. Picture them there, farmers and their wives, tradesmen, perhaps a minor gentleman or two, kneeling on cold flagstones, heads bowed, murmuring prayers in English now instead of Latin. Another change forced upon them by a distant queen and her bishops. Outside, the sky had been darkening since dawn. Not the natural grey of an overcast morning, but something else. Something thick and oppressive, the kind of darkness you can taste. The first rumble of thunder came while the vicar was reading from Scripture. Low and distant, rolling across the marshes like a barrel across cobblestones. A few heads lifted, windows rattled in their lead casements. Then the wind picked up, moaning through the eaves with a sound like anguish. The temperature dropped so suddenly that breath began to mist in the air, even in August. Then the rain came. Not a gentle patter, but a deluge. A roar against the roof tiles loud enough to drown out the vicar's voice. He raised his volume, determined to finish the lesson, but his words were swallowed by a crack of thunder so violent it shook dust from the rafters. Somewhere in the belfry, the bell gave an unbidden toll, a single mournful note that seemed to hang in the air long after it should have faded. The darkness intensified, palpable, the pamphlet called it later, a darkness you could almost touch. The candles guttered and dimmed, their flames bending sideways, though there was no draught, and then silence, total, absolute silence. The rain stopped mid-torrent. The thunder ceased as though cut with a knife. Even the usual creaks and settling of the old building went still. In that horrible quiet, every person in that church felt it, the certainty that something was watching them, that they were no longer alone. The north door burst open, not slowly, not with the gradual groan of old hinges. It flew inward with such force that it struck the wall and rebounded, swinging wildly. Through the opening came darkness, moving darkness, a shape that seemed to pull the shadows with it, absorbing what little light remained. Those nearest the door saw it first, a dog, but no earthly hound could match its size. Witnesses would later swear it stood as tall as a man at the shoulder, its body the length of a horse. Its coat was black, not brown black or grey black, but the deep, lightless black of a well shaft. Shaggy fur hung in matted ropes, slick as though it had emerged from water or something worse. But the eyes, God above the eyes, two burning orbs red as forge coals, set in a massive skull. They blazed with their own terrible light, casting a crimson glow across the flagstones. Some accounts speak of a single eye, centered in the forehead like a cyclops. But that morning at Bungay, those who lived to tell the tale remembered two. Two eyes that seemed to look through flesh and bone, straight into the soul, weighing it and finding it wanting. The beast moved with what the chronicler Abraham Fleming would describe as great swiftness and incredible haste. But those who saw it said something stranger, that it seemed to flow like liquid fire, like lightning given form and muscle. Its paws, enormous things, each the size of a dinner plate, made no sound on the stone floor, no click of claws, no pad of flesh, silent as death itself. It ran the length of the nave. People scrambled away, pressing themselves against the walls, against the pillars, anywhere to escape its path. Prayers turned to screams. A woman fainted, a child wailed. The vicar stood frozen at his lectern, his finger still marking his place in the book, his mouth open but producing no sound. Near the chancel, two men knelt in prayer. Older fellows by all accounts, devout. They hadn't moved when the door burst open, hadn't looked up from their folded hands. Perhaps they thought it was a test of faith. Perhaps they were too terrified to move. Perhaps they simply didn't believe what their ears were telling them. The black dog passed between them. There was a sound. Witnesses disagreed on what exactly. Some said a crack, like green wood splitting. Others described it as a wet snap, like a chicken's neck being wrung for the pot. What they all agreed on was this. Both men collapsed simultaneously, their heads twisted backward at an impossible angle, their necks broken clean through. Dead before they hit the ground. Dead so quickly they never had time to cry out. The beast didn't pause, didn't slow. It continued its terrible passage through the church, and as it did, a third man, younger, perhaps trying to flee, perhaps trying to help the fallen, found himself in its path. The creature touched him, not with teeth, not with claws, simply brushed against him in passing, and the man collapsed, fell to his knees first, then onto his side, his body contracting, curling in on itself. His skin darkened, tightened, shriveled, Fleming would write, like a piece of leather scorched in a hot fire. The man lived, God help him. He lived, but he would never straighten again, never walk without agony. The congregation watched as he aged 40 years in 40 seconds, watched his flesh draw tight against his bones, as though all the moisture had been burned from him in an instant. The smell hit then. Sulphur, brimstone, or perhaps, as we'd call it now, something like ozone, sharp and metallic in the throat. It filled the church, thick and choking, mixing with the scent of singed cloth and something worse, the particular stench of burned hair and flesh. Above them, the steeple groaned. Massive timbers, centuries old, began to crack. The great bell swung wildly in the tower, ringing discordant notes. Then, with a roar like the end of the world, the spire collapsed inward. Stone and wood crashed through the roof, smashing into the nave in an explosion of dust and debris. The church clock, an elaborate mechanism of gears and weights, was torn apart, its pieces scattered across the floor. Outside, the parish clerk, who had been cleaning the guttering, was hurled from his ladder by the force of the collapse, landing hard on the wet ground, miraculously alive but badly shaken. And through it all, the dog continued its course. It reached the far end of the church, and without breaking stride, it passed through the south wall as though stone were smoke. Gone. The silence returned, broken only by weeping, by the ragged breathing of those who remained, by the patter of rain resuming as though it had never stopped. But the beast was not finished. 12 miles to the east, in the village of Blythburgh, Holy Trinity Church stood on a rise overlooking the River Blythe. It was a magnificent structure. The Cathedral of the Marshes, they called it. Its soaring roof was adorned with carved angels, wings spread wide, their painted faces serene and eternal. The congregation there was larger, wealthier, the church grander. They had heard the thunder, of course, seen the unnatural darkness rolling across the fields, but they were safe inside God's house, protected by thick walls and holy ground. What could possibly harm them there? The thing entered without warning. Some said it came through the door. Others swore it materialized from the very air, condensing from shadow and smoke. It appeared along one of the high roof beams, clinging there like some monstrous bat. Then, as witnesses watched in paralyzed horror, it swung down through the church, moving along the wooden framework of the roof, its body crackling with an unholy light. Sparks flew where its paws touched timber. The smell of ozone and sulfur filled the sacred space. And as it descended, trailing fire, it struck. 2 men dead instantly. A boy, no more than 12, collapsed beside them, his chest stilled, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. Another parishioner's hand was seared, the flesh blackened as though he'd plunged it into a furnace. The font exploded. Ancient stone, blessed for baptism since the church was built, cracked in two with a sound like a cannon shot. Several of the roof angels, those beautiful carvings that had looked down on generations of worship, were scorched black, their painted features obliterated. The creature made for the north door. It burst through with the same terrible force it had used at Bungay, and as it passed, its claws, or something, raked the oak timbers. Deep grooves appeared in the wood, smoking and black, as though carved by red-hot iron. Then it was gone, vanished into the storm, leaving behind only the dead, the injured, and scorch marks that would endure for centuries. In one morning, in 2 churches, 6 souls had been claimed, and an entire region had been marked by terror that would echo down through the ages, whispered about in taverns and told to frighten children on nights just like this one. The silence in those 2 churches must have been absolute, the kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums, that makes your own heartbeat sound obscene. Then slowly the world returned, groans from the injured, weeping from the bereaved, the creak of timbers settling after the violence. Someone, a braver soul than most, went to check the bodies at Bungay, found those 2 men with their heads twisted round, their faces still bearing expressions of peaceful prayer, found the 3rd man curled and wizened, whimpering in agony, his body transformed by whatever had touched him. At Blythburgh, they gathered the dead boy and the 2 men, stared at the blackened angels in the roof, examined the split font, and wondered what force could shatter blessed stone. And they looked at those marks on the north door, deep, parallel grooves scored into ancient oak, still warm to the touch. Word spread like wildfire across Suffolk. By evening, Riders had been dispatched to neighbouring parishes. By the next day, the news had reached Norwich, then Cambridge, then London itself. Something had happened, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The dead were too numerous, the witnesses too credible, the damage too real. The church wardens at St Mary's, Bungay, recorded it all in their accounts. Practical men, these, concerned with the cost of repairs rather than theological speculation. Their ledger notes the storm, confirms the deaths, and tallies the expense of rebuilding the damaged steeple and replacing the shattered clock mechanism. But tellingly, they make no mention of a dog, no demon, just the storm and its awful consequences. That absence may mean any number of things. Perhaps they didn't consider rumour fit for a formal ledger. Perhaps they feared putting such talk to paper. Or perhaps, simplest of all, their job was repairs, not stories. But others had no such restraint. Enter Abraham Fleming, a London clergyman and pamphleteer with a sharp eye for a sensational story and a sharper axe to grind against sin and papistry. Fleming hadn't been anywhere near Suffolk that August morning, hadn't seen the bodies or heard the screams, but he heard the reports, fevered accounts sent to London by letter, oral testimonies that grew more elaborate with each retelling, and he recognised opportunity when it presented itself. Within months, his pamphlet was printed and circulating through the capital and beyond. A strong and terrible wonder. In it, Fleming transformed the lightning strike into a moral lesson wrapped in horror. The dog became explicitly demonic. This black dog, or the devil in such a likeness, sent by God to punish a congregation steeped in wickedness. He described in lurid detail how the beast wrung the necks of them both at one instant clean backward, how it shriveled a man like scorched leather, how it brought fire and death to those gathered in supposed sanctity. Fleming's agenda was transparent. He was a Protestant propagandist, using the tragedy to terrify his readers into religious compliance. The storm became proof of God's wrath. The deaths became evidence that no one, not even those at prayer, was safe from divine judgment if they harboured sin in their hearts. It was powerful stuff, terrifying stuff, and it sold exceptionally well. The pamphlet ensured that the events of August 4th would never be forgotten. But it also twisted them, shaped them into something that served Fleming's purposes rather than straightforward historical truth. The legend of Black Shuck, already old, already embedded in the local consciousness, now had a defining moment, a crystallization point. Before 1577, Shuck was a vague entity of the marshlands and coastal paths. After Fleming's pamphlet, he was the hellhound of Bungay, the demon that murdered Christians in their own churches. But what actually happened that morning? Modern analysis suggests ball lightning, a rare and still poorly understood phenomenon where plasma spheres form during severe thunderstorms. These orbs of electrical energy can pass through walls, move erratically, emit intense heat and light, and produce the distinctive smell of ozone that witnesses mistake for sulfur. They've been known to cause severe burns, to move along conductive surfaces like roof beams to explode with tremendous force. The description matches remarkably well. A glowing shape, dark at its core, but surrounded by fire, moving with impossible speed along the wooden framework of the roof. The swinging down motion Fleming describes is precisely how ball lightning is often reported when it follows conductive materials. The victim's injuries, the shriveled flesh, the electrical burns, sit comfortably beside high voltage exposure. Even the silence of the creature's movement makes sense. Plasma doesn't have footsteps, and those scorch marks on the Blythburgh door. Some researchers, including Timothy Easton, have argued they're more likely apotropaic marks. Ritual burns made by parishioners using candles to ward off evil spirits and lightning strikes. A desperate magic, if you will. Protective charms worked into the very fabric of the church. Over the centuries, as the memory of the ritual faded, the marks were reinterpreted as evidence of the attack itself. The wards against the devil became, in folk memory, the devil's own signature. There's a bitter irony there, don't you think? The marks meant to keep evil out became proof that evil had gotten in. As for the giant dog skeleton found at Leiston Abbey in 2014, that magnificent beast sometimes described as standing 7 feet tall when reared, buried with care in the 16th century, it reminds us of something plain. Enormous hounds did exist in Suffolk during Shuck's heyday. Some wealthy lord's prized mastiff, perhaps, a hunting dog of unusual size. On a misty night, glimpsed through fog on an ancient trackway, such an animal could easily become the stuff of nightmares, could easily be mistaken for something far more sinister. But here's the thing about legends. Truth and fiction don't stay neatly separated. They blend together like smoke and mist, until you can't quite tell where one ends and the other begins. Did ball lightning kill those people? It is one of the strongest explanations we have. Was Fleming's account exaggerated propaganda? Almost certainly. But does that mean Black Shuck isn't real? Ask the people of Bungay. They've put the beast on their coat of arms, standing proud atop a lightning bolt. It's on their weather vane in the marketplace, keeping watch over the town square. They've named running clubs and festivals after him. The legend has become identity, woven into the very fabric of the place. Visit Blythburgh on a grey afternoon, when the sea fog rolls in thick. Stand at that north door and run your fingers along those grooves in the wood, deep, parallel, scorched black. Tell yourself they're just ritual marks, just protective burns made by frightened hands. But you'll still feel the chill, won't you? Still glance over your shoulder at the empty nave. Still wonder what you'd do if you heard a howl outside, if you saw eyes like burning coals watching from the churchyard. The rules of the legend persist, you see. Whistle at night in the lonely lanes of Suffolk, and you might call him to you. Hear the silent padding of enormous paws behind you on the coastal path. And whatever you do, don't look back. Meet his gaze, that single burning eye some claim to have seen, and you'll have a year. 12 months to set your affairs in order before death claims its due. Old superstition, perhaps, but the locals still won't whistle after dark, still quicken their pace when crossing certain bridges, still tell their children to come inside before the fog rolls in from the sea. The legend endures because, in some deep and primal way, we understand what Shuck represents. He's the violence of nature that can strike without warning. He's the judgment we fear we deserve. He's the shadow at the edge of civilization, the reminder that for all our electric light and rational explanations, we're still small creatures in a vast and often hostile world. And he's still out there if the stories are true, still prowling the boundaries between land and sea, between the living and the dead, still waiting in the ha for the unwary traveller, the unrepentant sinner, the fool who whistles in the dark. So then, the fire's burning low, and I see you eyeing the door with some apprehension. Can't say I blame you. It's still blowing a gale out there, and the walk back to wherever you're lodging won't be a pleasant one. The mist will be thick tonight, the kind that swallows the lamppost whole and turns familiar streets strange. But you'll be fine. Probably. Just remember the rules, eh? No whistling. Don't look back if you hear something following. And if you happen to see a massive black shape with eyes like coals watching from the hedgerow, well, make your peace with whatever God you believe in, and hope you've lived well enough that he's not yet ready to send his hound to fetch you. Here, one more for the road, a toast if you will, to the 6 souls claimed at Bungay and Blythburgh on that August morning in 1577, to the rational explanations that make us feel safer, and to the old legends that refuse to die, no matter how brightly we light our modern world. May you walk safely in the dark, and may Black Shuck, wherever he prowls tonight, choose to pass you by. Now off with you. The night's not getting any younger, and neither are we. You've been listening to British Pub Lore. Mind how you go.